Alright guys, naval warfare has always been one of the most hotly debated features in Total War. For me, and for many players, the sea is where strategy came alive in games like Shogun 2, Empire, Rome 2, or Attila, fleets patrolling trade routes, amphibious invasions threatening every coastline, and epic tactical battles with waves of ships crashing and colliding into each other. Yet in the most recent titles, where they could have been really decent like Pharaoh or Troy, naval combat has been totally removed. The result of that has been campaigns that feel narrower and battles that are less diverse. If Total War is about capturing the full scope of war, then naval warfare absolutely deserves to return in the next game. And in this video, I'm going to tell you exactly why. Now, as we all know, the series has always experimented with naval warfare in different ways, and each approach left its own impression on players. Empire Total War was the first title to really push naval battles as a core system. It introduced fully 3D ship-to-ship combat with broadsides, sails, wind direction, and weather all playing major roles. Naval fleets weren't just armies on water, they required careful positioning, patience, and timing. A well-placed broadside could cripple an enemy ship, while poor handling in a storm could scatter your entire navy. It was an incredibly ambitious mechanic in an incredibly ambitious game, and cinematic, and while sometimes clunky in execution, those battles had a weight and scale that many players still look back on as some of the most epic in the series. Then came Shogun 2, which dialed back the complexity but made naval combat sharper and more approachable. The Japanese setting brought its own flavor with smaller, faster ships that emphasized boarding, fire arrows, and tactical maneuvering rather than long-range gunnery duels. Here, the seas weren't just a backdrop, they were an extension of the clan wars raging across Japan, and naval control could make or break your ability to move troops and dominate trade nodes. It ended up showing that naval battles didn't have to be sprawling or overly complicated to be exciting and meaningful. When Rome 2 came around, we had something even more unique, the blending of naval and land combat. Fleets could fight each other at sea, but they could also take part in sieges and coastal battles. Watching ships beach themselves and disembark soldiers straight into the fight was a dramatic change of pace, and boarding actions gave battles a more brutal, hands-on feel. Rome 2's system wasn't exactly loved. Some players found ship handling a little awkward, and the AI didn't really handle it very well, but it introduced amphibious mechanics that hinted at what could be possible if developed further. The integration of land and sea was something no Total War had really attempted at that scale before, and it made naval warfare feel more connected to the campaign than ever. Unfortunately, as we know, later titles began moving away from naval systems entirely. Creative Assembly had naval combat in Attila and a little bit in Thrones of Britannia, but by the time of Three Kingdoms and Warhammer, navies existed only as transport tools, abstracting away combat entirely. What was lost wasn't just the spectacle of ships colliding on stormy seas, but the entire strategic layer that came with them. Blockades, naval invasions, a sense that the sea itself was as much a battlefield as the land. Without meaningful naval mechanics, campaigns became more predictable, and whole aspects of history, from the dominance of Athenian triremes to the decisive clash at Actium, disappeared from the Total War formula. This history shows that Creative Assembly never really perfected naval warfare, but it has been tried in ways that proved its value. Empire showed us scale and spectacle, Shogun 2 showed us elegance and simplicity, and Rome 2 showed us integration with land battles. Each attempt left behind lessons, and together they outline a clear path forward. Naval battles don't need to be overly complex or overwhelming, but when they're done right, they add both strategic depth and cinematic variety that makes the entire game feel more complete. On the campaign map side of Total War, the lack of naval mechanics doesn't just mean no sea battles, it means a huge chunk of Empire management is missing altogether as well. Historically, empires didn't just expand across land, they rose and fell on their ability to dominate the seas. Control of trade routes, blockades, overseas colonies, food shipments, even the movement of entire armies all depended on naval strength. In Total War, when this layer is absent or watered down, the campaign loses much of its dynamism. The map feels flatter, less alive, simply because water becomes a barrier instead of a battleground. Another very clear example of why navies matter is trade. In Shogun 2, maritime trade wasn't some background number ticking in the economy tab, it was the lifeblood of your clan. Fleets weren't optional, they were mandatory if you wanted to secure your lucrative trade nodes full of resources like silk or war horses. You didn't just build a navy to look intimidating, you built it because failing meant another clan would take those resources, enrich themselves, and crush you with the wealth they gained. That kind of high-stakes competition turned oceans into extensions of the campaign map. Without naval gameplay on the campaign, trade routes become static, safe, and uninteractive, more like spreadsheets than actual strategy. Naval presence also, of course, changes how mobility and logistics work. In Rome 2, fleets were what made true amphibious warfare possible. Instead of slogging through hostile territory step by step, you could load an army onto ships and land them directly in the heart of enemy territory. This introduced a permanent sense of tension to coastal settlements, because even if your borders were secure, your ports might not be. So navies weren't just about offensive action and invasions, they were about security as well. A strong fleet meant your trade lanes were protected, your ports defended, and your armies could cross seas without fear of interception. Losing a fleet, on the other hand, could cripple an empire entirely. Imagine being mid-campaign only for your trade shipments to get blockaded, plunging your cities into famine. Or picture your reinforcements stranded on the wrong side of a sea because your transports were being wiped out. That's the kind of drama a fully fleshed out naval system could bring to the campaign. High risk, high reward choices that make victory on land feel inseparable from victory at sea. Supply mechanics are another area where naval warfare could add massive depth. In reality, ancient and medieval armies rarely marched far without logistical support, so fleets carried grain, soldiers, and materials to sustain war efforts overseas. Integrating this into Total War would mean players couldn't just spam armies endlessly, they'd need to protect their supply lines. An enemy fleet slipping past your defenses could choke off reinforcements, forcing you to retreat or starve. Suddenly, naval superiority isn't just extra, it's the foundation of sustaining wars on distant fronts. And this ties directly into how navies could affect diplomacy as well. Imagine a campaign where weaker factions ally with you not because of your land armies, but because of your naval dominance. Where rivals sue for peace after their ports are strangled by your blockades, or where trade treaties are coveted because your fleet can guarantee their safety. A system like this would make diplomacy and naval strength go hand in hand, creating a campaign experience where every port and sea lane becomes politically and militarily vital. When you add it all up, trade control, strategic invasions, security, supply lines, diplomacy, it becomes obvious just how much depth naval warfare can add to campaigns. Without it, half the map might as well be wallpaper. With it, every coastline matters, every trade node is a prize, and the sea becomes as much a battlefield as the land. A well-designed naval layer doesn't just expand the campaign, it transforms it, turning what could be a series of land wars into a sprawling, multi-dimensional contest for global supremacy. On the battlefield side of things, naval warfare is where Total War could inject a sense of spectacle and variety that land battles alone can't deliver. Naval encounters are inherently cinematic, ships colliding in brutal rams, boarding actions turning decks into chaotic melees, volleys of missiles streaking across the water, and when Total War has included these moments in the past, they've added not only mechanical depth, but also raw visual drama. Take those away, and you lose one of the most visceral layers of warfare the series has ever offered. And historically, sea battles often decided wars just as much as land battles did. The Battle of Salamis broke Persia's attempt to invade Greece, Actium cemented Octavian's rise as Augustus, and centuries later, Trafalgar ensured British dominance of the seas. These weren't sideshows, they were decisive turning points in these conflicts. Total War's primary strength has always been letting players recreate these kinds of events, but without naval battles, an entire category of historical experience is missing. You might conquer half the Mediterranean in Rome 2, but if you never get into a proper sea battle, then the game skips one of antiquity's most defining features. Mechanically, naval combat brings in forms of warfare that don't exist on land either. In antiquity-focused titles, ramming and boarding are central. A trireme slamming into an enemy hull isn't just about numbers, it's about timing, timing, maneuver, and control. Boarding, meanwhile, blends land and sea combat as ships effectively become floating battlegrounds where morale, fatigue, and tactics all come into play. In the gunpowder era games, of course, like Empire and Napoleon, we saw a completely different layer as well. Broadsides, cannon duels, wind positioning, essentially a second combat system parallel to land battles. Bringing naval combat back would reintroduce this tactical diversity, giving players battles that feel distinct rather than repeating variations of land skirmishes. For me though, where naval warfare truly gets exciting is in the potential of combined arms and coastal battles. Imagine attacking a port city while your fleet bombards enemy walls from offshore, or using ships to cut off retreating land forces by blockading a shoreline. Amphibious warfare could be pushed far beyond the simple walk your troops off the boat's mechanics of Rome 2. Instead, landings could become their own dynamic phase of a battle. Fleets clearing beaches, transports unloading under fire, defenders scrambling to push the enemy back into the sea. The line between land battle and naval battle could blur into one seamless cinematic encounter. Another potential evolution is naval bombardments influencing purely land battles. Some of the Shogun 2 Fall of the Samurai battles already touched on this, where off-map artillery or naval support could alter the flow of combat completely. Imagine leading an army into a coastal engagement while your fleet provides supporting fire, forcing the enemy to adapt their formations and tactics to deal with both threats. This would add new layers of strategy. Do you position your troops aggressively, trusting your fleet to hammer the enemy, or hold back in case the wind or positioning robs you of that advantage? It would mean no two battles play out the same way, because the sea becomes a factor even when you're fighting on land. Essentially, naval battles expand Total War's battlefield sandbox in ways no other system can. They're not just extra content, they're a fundamental missing piece of how wars were fought, and without them, campaigns risk feeling one-dimensional. With them, Total War gains back that unpredictability, that cinematic flair, and that ability to truly capture the full scope of historical warfare. Overall, the absence of naval warfare leaves a gap that's impossible to ignore. Campaigns lose a vital layer of strategy without fleets to control trade, protect supply lines, or threaten coastal invasions, and battles lose that spectacle and variety that only great clashes at sea can provide. For me, personally, naval battles were always some of the most memorable parts of the series. In Empire and Napoleon, the crashing broadsides and burning ships made for some of the most cinematic encounters in all of Total War. Shogun 2 brought its own flavor with tight, tactical ship combat that tied directly into the campaign map. Even in Rome 2 and Attila, where the mechanics weren't perfect, fleets still mattered as a campaign tool, blocking straits, landing armies, and shaping the flow of wars. Naval battles simply added a strategic layer that's been sorely missing since, and they should come back for the next game. They added a strategic layer that's been sorely missing since. Games like Troy or Pharaoh could have used naval warfare to elevate their campaigns massively, and instead the seas feel like empty space. Bringing naval combat back isn't just about nostalgia, it's about restoring the full scope of what's possible in Total War, where armies and fleets work together to decide the fate of empires. If Creative Assembly truly wants to recapture that grand scale, the next Total War absolutely needs to bring ships back into the fight. And that's essentially it for today, guys. Either way, I really hope you enjoyed this video and found it informative. If you did, give it a like, drop any thoughts or questions in the comment section below, and let me know what you think about bringing naval combat back in the next Total War. Subscribe to the channel for more videos just like this, and thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you next time.